So much like how the Fellowship of the Ring could be considered a pretty big abridgment, a very similar treatment is given here to the Two Towers. With the Fellowship of the Ring, there were a few minor changes here and there that I could mostly go along with, except for the idea of Frodo essentially being a complete wimp in the movie. But there were actually a few changes to the Two Towers that I was not really a big fan of. So without further ado, let's compare the book and the movie. So as I mentioned in my last review, part of the Two Towers was actually in the first movie. So the book The Two Towers starts off shortly after Frodo leaves the company. Boromir is beside himself when Merry and Pippin go to his aid to try to see what's going on. However, in the scuffle, a bunch of orc-human hybrids come in, all bearing a white hand. Which for me, I would have figured that would have been more like a little plaque on their helmets with like a little drawing of a white hand made out of ivy or something. But here it almost looks more like Wilson and the idea that Saruman dipped his hand in white and then placed it on the chest of every one of his warriors. That's more pedantic stuff right there. Boromir, unfortunately, is killed, but before he passes, he tells Aragorn that Merry and Pippin were taken by the orc party. And so for a while, Legolas, Aragorn, and Gimli are all in hot pursuit of the orc party, hoping that they can get Merry and Pippin back somehow. However, a problem with orcs is that they don't need a lot of rest. They could just keep marching for days upon days. And on top of that, they're very uncivilized creatures, so obviously they don't really care so much if a few people die or if they run out of food. They'll just eat their fellow orc or something like that. Very pleasant creatures, aren't they? Their journey takes them to the Gap of Rohan, where Aragorn spots a group of horsemen just kind of surveying the area, or so it seems. Aragorn signals them, and at first, these people are very annoyed that somebody is trespassing on their land, and are very tempted to kill them, as all of them are pointing spears at these strangers. Aragorn explains their quest, but unfortunately the captain of the guard doesn't have very good news. It is a custom of theirs that when there is a great battle, that they burn all the bodies. They were able to eliminate all of the orcs, and there was no Hobbit remains. However, the party wants to make sure and double checks over the remains. However, the main thing is because they're trespassing on somebody else's land, them walking freely is something that has to be approved by the king. They agree to seek permission once they examine the pile. Since it is a distance away, these people actually lend them a few horses. And Gimli, being a dwarf, is very unaccustomed to horseback riding, so it's really Legolas keeping the reins while the dwarf is just kind of slowly bouncing around, trying to get used to this idea. They go to the pile, and this is one of the details I love that they captured in the movie. By the pile, they put an orc head on a stick to kind of mark where it was, and I just love that little detail. Even though it's really gross, and oftentimes that has often put me in the dark places seeing stuff like that. In terms of the movie and the book, it's pretty much all the same at this point. Where the major differences are, is the story of what Merry and Pippin were doing since they left. So, the orcs had been given strict orders that these hobbits should be returned to Saruman unharmed, which the captain of the guard, named Ugluk, is enforcing severely. In fact, he even kills a few of the orcs, slicing their heads right off, saying, "Any other questions?" Now this one is more of a pedantic thing, like Sauron's white hand, but I found this a little distracting. So the voice of the orcs honestly sounded very human. Maybe it was the way I was reading it or the way it was described. I would have figured their voices would have been somewhere between like a growl and barking orders. So, for example, Ugluk would just be like,
"You're not allowed to touch the hobbits. You will have to answer for Sauron if you do something like that."
but instead, a few of them even have like British accents, so they're just kind of like, this is not very good. And I'm like, these are the orcs. It doesn't really match up with their faces so much. But the main things to keep in mind is that I want to say it was Mary. I always get the two mixed up, I'm not going to lie. Had like a pretty big gash on his forehead, and all this marching has left him very tired. So, as a way to try to get them on their feet, the orc has this sort of liqueur that he shoves down both of their throats. The liqueur is able to close up that cut really nicely. However, allegedly he had a big white scar there for the rest of his days, and they're able to keep going at a pretty good distance. But none of them want to know what is in that horrid brew because it just tastes like death. So right before the party is assaulted, the hobbits realize that one of the guards knows about the ring, and he wants the power all to himself. So with a fair bit of convincing, the orc as well as the two hobbits are led away from the main party, where Merry and Pippin talk about the details of the ring. This actually turned out to be perfect timing, as an arrow found its way into the throat of this one orc. Now the main problem is they are tied up. Merry, however, was able to loosen his bonds so he could still have his hands to work with, but he just pretended he was tied this whole time. So he is able to go up to this dead orc, take out the knife, cut Pippin's bonds, and they both run into the forest before the intense battle gets to them. Now, an important thing to note is in the book, one of them is nearly squashed to death, as one of the horses almost runs over them. You see, these cloaks that the Lady Galadriel gave them grants them the power of invisibility, so it was pretty lucky that the horse didn't hit him. In the movie, this one is almost played up more for suspense, as you start to see the feet almost coming down to Pippin's head when it flashes back. They escape to a nearby forest. Much like the forest at the end of Buckland, there are rumors that the trees are almost alive in this one. And I do like the idea that there's a bit of a callback to that in the movie as well. But here's one of the bigger differences, is how they meet the character known as Treebeard. In the movie, an orc is actually still alive and follows them. To seek refuge, they climb to the height of a tall tree. In doing so, they realize that the tree is alive, and then immediately squashes the orc before any more damage can be done. Now this is very different in the book. Merry and Pippin take their time and just walk around leisurely in this forest, drinking out of the nearby stream, getting bits and pieces of food, lumbus they have left over, and just putting all together what has happened on that march of, I want to say it was about 4, maybe 5 days. When they decide it's about time to get out of the forest, so one of them decides to climb to the top and takes in the breathtaking scenery, saying, "This is fantastic." But just then in the distance, a voice starts to speak, saying, "Yes, it is a very beautiful forest, isn't it?" To which both of them stare in amazement. The tree is alive. This is what's known as an ent. Now this is kind of another little pedantic thing for you. So the way this ent is described, he has almost a musical, almost soothing sounding voice. So I would have figured he would have sounded kind of like a, yes, now this is something very interesting that is going on here. Well, in the movie, he sounds a bit more like what I pictured the orcs to sound like. Now in the book, the hobbits make pretty good friends with this ent. The ent even invites them to his house and gets them a little bit of fresh spring water. something that helps the Ents grow and even helps the Hobbits grow a little bit. They do a lot of back and forth trying to figure out what each one is. The Ent has never heard of Hobbits before and learns his fill about them, and the Hobbits have never heard of an Ent before. However, as they describe their travels, Treebeard is rather distraught at the idea that Saruman is the one that's sending all these orcs, because he's seeing that the orcs are just chopping down tree after tree. Most of them were actually his best friends. Each of them had voices, and he's had some bitterness to that. So he believes that something should be done about this. So he gets a bit of a meeting. But one of the biggest problems with Ents is that everything takes a very long time, much like how trees are in general. The meeting goes on for about a week, but to keep them company, a very young Ent known as Quickbeam is able to talk with them and able to just kind of do something while the adults are talking. After that time, they believe that Saruman must be stopped, and an assault on Isengard is planned. This is very different from how it is in the movie. Pippin actually has to convince Treebeard, and there is where you realize that Ents take forever to do anything. Which, when it was described at this point in the book, it's just kind of like, yeah, we know Ents take forever, but here it's more like, wait, you took 3 days just to establish that Merry and Pippin weren't orcs? So Pippin actually tricks Treebeard, and he asks that they be sent to Isengard instead of back home to their place of Hobbiton. There, Treebeard sees the desolation that Saruman has wrought to the land, and from there he's able to rally the troops together for the assault on Isengard. The events are similar, but I just can't stand this idea that all of a sudden Treebeard kind of goes from being like a wise old sage like he is in the book to just a rambling fool that just takes forever to do anything. I mean, don't get me wrong, he does ramble in the book, but at least there's more context as to why he's rambling. In their travels, Merry had one of the elfish clips able to hold on his cloak. He is able to discreetly throw it on the path in order for Aragorn and the others to find them. This plays out pretty similar in both, but he has to be a bit more tricky in the book, as he pretends to kind of wander away, drop it, and then run with the rest of the party. Well, in the movie, it's more like, okay, anybody watching? Luckily, Aragorn and the party are able to pick up on this, and with Aragorn's ranger instincts, he's able to follow the footprints and find out that the hobbits went into the woods. They go into the woods where they're a little nervous. In fact, Gimli, at least in the book, puts away his axe because he can almost feel like the forest is alive and full of hate. Well, in the movie, he wants to keep his guard up. In the woods, they bump into an old friend, Gandalf. Now, they kind of bumped into him a few other times. Rumors circulate that Saruman wanders these woods, but is in the shape of a crippled old man. And that's what they've been seeing these past few days. The last encounter they have with this old man, all of a sudden their horses seem to be spooked away. The old man seems to about to attack them, to which Legolas raises the bow, Aragorn with the sword, and Gimli with the axe. But just then, everything just freezes. The old man takes off his robes to reveal that he's Gandalf. Now, how Gandalf survived is explained just about the same way in both the book and the movie. Essentially, after that deep fall with the Balrogs, there was a bit of fighting going on, to which they both end up in a subterranean lake. It's a fantasy, so I'm not going to question the idea that they survived that. But Gandalf doesn't really know a way out, so he just followed Balrog all the way. Apparently, there was just stairs upon stairs upon stairs until both of them face off at the top of a mountain. Gandalf emerges victorious, but it seems like he is slowly dying. But instead of dying, he's promoted from Gandalf the Grey to Gandalf the White. And the main reason that the horses seem to have been scared off is because Gandalf rides upon the king of all horses known as Shadowfax, which I kept reading it as Shadow Fox, but I'll try my best to say Shadowfax. The horses were in reverence to them, so they all kind of ran to him and bowed down. This little part about the horses isn't really mentioned in the movie. But what is mentioned is this idea that Gandalf is able to call the horse by whistling. This is one of the things I found hilarious because the first thing I thought of was, Breath of the Wild. So I figured in the movie, as well as in the book, it'd be a very similar thing. He'd be whistling with like his 2 fingers or something, a loud whistle, and then the horse would be like, I can't do a horse impression. From there, they go back to the king. In the book, Gandalf wanted to return Shadowfox, as well as all the other horses that were borrowed from the people of Rohan. But in the movie, Gandalf realizes that the king has been corrupted by an agent of Sauron, one known as Wormtongue. So they get to the village. Gandalf is not really liked in this place, because it seems like whenever he shows up, he bears bad news. And on top of that, the people of Rohan think he just kind of stole Shadowfax. With a lot of convincing, the party is able to seek an audience with the king. Now there is a scene here in the book that I wish could have made it into the movie. So the king will not see them unless they all turn in their weapons. Each one of them is very hesitant, but I love how each one kind of brings up a little threat. So Aragorn, when he gives his sword, saying, make sure nobody else touches it. Anybody else that will die. And Legolas brings his bow and arrow, basically saying, guard this with your life, otherwise it will end up in you. And a very similar thing with the axe. In both the book and the movie, the wizard does not want to give up his staff. He claims that it's his walking stick. In the book, it actually took quite a fair bit of convincing that this indeed was a walking stick. Well, in the movie, he's just kind of like, okay, good enough for me, go on in. When they seek an audience with the king, they realize that a terrible curse is pretty much going on him. He is old, decrepit, and it just kind of has this haze across his eyes. He's been corrupted by Wormtongue, who has been feeding him all this information, as well as been giving him nightmares ever since the king took him into his confidence. Gandalf, though, is able to reverse the spell, to which Wormtongue realizes that he has no more power and runs away screaming. The king doesn't mind this, even gives him a horse to be able to run back to Sauron to say, yeah, you're not doing this again. In the movie, though, it seems almost like Gandalf does an exorcist on the king. Like, Saruman is like burrowed into his subconscious and he has to knock him out of there. To which afterwards you just kind of see him fly back. And then from there, the idea of Wormtongue, he tries to defend himself a little bit, is thrown out, and then runs screaming. I kind of like how it worked out in the book more. So free of this curse, the king starts to de-age, all of a sudden getting a lot stronger and a lot younger looking. Gandalf then suggests perhaps your hands would know what strength is if they grabbed onto your sword. In the book, the sword was actually stolen by Wormtongue, so there's a lot of back and forth trying to figure out where it is. And then when the king finally gets it, he feels his strength welling up in his body, and he's ready for anything. So when Gandalf says that a massive army is heading Helm's Deep, he is ready for it. Being this decrepit old man, he feels like he's wasted enough time, and he'd rather die on the battlefield anyway. This is a lot different from the movie, as the king wants to retreat to Helm's Deep, which is a pretty formidable fortress. Well, in the book, it's more described as like a halfway point. How it happens in the book is that all the men are sent to Helm's Deep, and all the women and children are sent off to a back village with a few little guards here and there just to make sure that they're safe. But I just found this change to be rather infuriating, that the king in this version doesn't want to ride fiercely into battle anymore. It's more like, I just want to make sure my people are safe. And all throughout the battle, he's even like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to start a war. And then one of the other big changes. So the party is all going to Helm's Deep. As soon as they get there, Gandalf says that he'll be able to come back the next morning with more troops. To which everybody just follows his lead, because Helm's Deep is kind of well protected and they might be able to survive the onslaught of orcs coming by. They're able to make it to Helm's Deep just fine. However, in the movie, on their way to Helm's Deep, they are attacked by a party of wargs. They lose a lot of soldiers, and it almost seems like you're about to lose Aragorn. Which, yeah, I get the idea they want to build up a little suspense, but A, this never happened in the book, and B, the third installment is called The Return of the King, and he's the king that is returning, so you know that he can't die. It just feels utterly worthless. Although I guess they just kind of want to sell this love story between Aragorn and Arwen. The party is able to make it to Helm's Deep, but it doesn't seem like they're going to survive the night. There is very little to protect them. They have very little troops. They do have a fair stash here and there, but most of the people stationed at this place are women and children that can't fight. And on top of that, even young boys are being sent into the front line to be able to keep up defenses. And what's even more fascinating is that later on, an army of elves goes into Helm's Deep in order to fortify the defenses. This never happened in the book because, well, they already had the defenses they needed in Helm's Deep, and the king was just kind of like, yeah, we're gonna fight to the last man, the last woman, to the last child. We're gonna show those orcs a thing or two. And in the movie, he's just kind of like, do I really have to do this? And then from there, we descend into the epic battle of Helm's Deep. Both are just a whole lot of fun to experience. There's just so much going on. But how the battle begins is very different. So in the movie, there's this one old guy that's holding out his bow and arrow to shoot down one of the orcs. But unfortunately, his fingers don't work well. He lets go of it, and one of the orcs gets pinned at the neck. He drops dead, and then the battle begins. Here, there's almost a little bit of parlaying, because not all of them are orcs. Some of them are just evil men that Sauron convinced that this is what needed to be done. To which none of them listen, and they go on to an epic battle. And I do love the idea that in both interpretations there's a bit of a contest between Legolas and Gimli to see how many people can be slain. Now there's a section in the book where Gimli is separated from Legolas. He goes to another party just outside, where Legolas stays on the top. It seems like the battle is going well, when all of a sudden Saruman sends this huge blast and rips a great hole in the wall. In the movie, Saruman gives the orcs a bomb, and that's how they are able to breach the walls. Fighting goes on for a while, and it's starting to get kind of hopeless, so everybody just kind of falls back into the defense position and just kind of rest up, because the way they describe it in the book, it is quite a lot of effort just to be hacking and slashing all the time. They just need a break to be able to recuperate. After a while, they get a second wind, and they're back at it again. The sun rises the next day, to which everybody stares in amazement, as Gandalf the White comes by with reinforcements. hobbits. And with there, the Battle of Helm's Deep is won. But it seems like Gimli is nowhere to be found. He does show up, but he has a big wound on his head wrapped up in a bandage, to which Legolas is very concerned. But Gimli's still wanting to get the upper hand in this game, says 25. To which Legolas says, "You beat me." With the battle being won, Gandalf, as well as the king, a few guards, Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas, all go together to see what Isengard is all about. To their amazement, they find the place has been completely trashed. As they go into the city, they just kind of see Merry and Pippin sitting there in the road. Merry's passed out while Pippin's just kind of like, my lord, we are on duty to protect the gate of Isengard, and we have a message for you. To which they recount the events of how in the world Isengard got destroyed, as well as the idea that Treebeard wanted to see Gandalf. While Gandalf and the king are seeking counsel with Treebeard, the rest of the party is having a fantastic reunion, just trying to figure out what happened between that time they got lost when Boromir died and here, to which they recount the tale. Now this part is very briefly put in the movie. You get to see the destruction of Isengard, which I'm really happy about. The way it's described in the book, it's just fun to see these Ents just completely obliterating the place. But just one minor complaint. In the book, the Ents are described as not having knees. Their legs don't really bend, they just kind of move. But yet in the movie, they bend. It's just a minor thing, but I'm like, oh, come on, you couldn't keep just that little detail in there? The party wants to depart, but before they do, Wormtongue, who has been riding feverishly back to his master, shows up and then has to swim his way up to Orthanc. I just kind of love the idea that perhaps while they're both there in Orthanc, it's just kind of like Jafar and Iago just screaming at each other. They're just kind of like, oh, come on, you should have anticipated such a thing. What? How was I supposed to anticipate this much destruction? Oh, you're the idiot. Oh, shut up. And then they're just doing this back and forth. But before they go, Gandalf wants to talk to Saruman. Saruman, however, still has a fair bit of power, and his voice can be kind of hypnotic to a few. However, Gandalf, as well as a few of the others, are able to attack back and break this hypnotic spell. At the end of the conversation, Saruman refuses to leave the tower, to which Gandalf says, "You have no more power. Your wand is destroyed." And you see it just break in half and fall to the ground. In retaliation, an odd stone is then thrown from Orthanc onto the heads of everybody else. It doesn't hit anybody, but Pippin is very curious about it and picks it up, to which Gandalf's being really mysterious, saying, "Give that to me. That is not for the likes of young hobbits." However, the stone seems to keep calling to him, even as they're journeying back to Gondor to make sure that the troops are all set there. Pippin can't hold on to this desire any longer and looks into the stone, to which he sees an unbearable evil that just petrifies him. The Eye of Sauron is in there and even tries to convince him to give where the party is, but Pippin doesn't bend. However, he still has a lot of scars from there when Gandalf comes by and covering up the rock, and they all immediately go. Pippin's questions about this odd stone are satisfied as they go on their way. Obviously, none of this is in the movie. Instead, we focus back on Frodo and Sam in the dark land of Mordor. Now, obviously they're struggling because they really have no idea where they're going. In both versions, they bump into Gollum. They definitely nailed Gollum. I mean, Andy Serkis just gives a fantastic performance of this disgusting little creature. But one of the things that does annoy me is that the book kind of has a few quiet moments where Sam and Frodo are just kind of sitting there talking. It's like, I don't know, I feel like we've passed that rock before. Oh, don't be silly. They all look alike. Simple things like that. So Golem is captured. And I love that the interaction happens exactly as it does in the book, as it does in the movie. The idea that Sam is the only one able to grab onto him. However, Golem bites him in the shoulder, to which Sam falls back on him, bringing all the force he has on him, and that's enough to be able to stun him and then tie him up. To which Golem complains that the rope is burning him. It killed us! Kill us! After a little while, Frodo starts to feel guilty for this pitiful creature and decides that he would untie him if he swore to be faithful. To which Golem said he would swear for sure, and Frodo says, "What do you swear on?"
The precious. I swear on the precious.
I can't seem to do a good Golem impression anymore, I'm sorry. Frodo agrees to this, and Golem leads him up to the front gate of Mordor. One of the many odd places they pass is what's known as the Dead Swamp, which I want to say is what you see right here at the very bottom of the book. So it's pretty similar how it's described in both of them. It's just a swamp that looks like it's filled with dead bodies, and every so often there's like little flames that come up. Candles, that Golem calls them, to kind of celebrate the dead. Now Golem says, make sure not to fall in, otherwise you will become one of them, and be sure not to follow the flames. Now what is rather interesting is the movie seems to take this one step further. Frodo all of a sudden is hypnotized by one of these dead beings in the water, when all of a sudden its eyes open and Frodo is just sucked in, to which all the dead spirits are just slowly clawing him in, trying to take him down to the netherworld almost, to which Golem reaches in and saves him. I have a feeling that extra scene was probably added in to try to sell the trust between Golem and Frodo, because in the book there was a bit more time to be able to develop this sort of hate-love friendship they have. So they make it to the front gate, to which Sam, Frodo, and Golem know that there's just no way of getting past there. However, Golem knows of another way to get in. They're journeying along all right, when Sam realizes that they're running a little low on lumbus. And on top of that, while this bread is able to keep them going, it doesn't really give that full feeling that he, as well as other hobbits, are more accustomed to. We come to what looks like a pretty nice forest that hasn't been corrupted by all the evil, to which Sam asks Golem to get something worthy of them to eat, to which Golem brings back a few rabbits. Sam starts to cook him, to which Golem is just disgusted, because he prefers to eat his rabbit raw. However, what Golem really loves is fish. Now while they are doing the cooking, the smoke starts to kind of trail off, and unfortunately they are spotted by a few very odd-looking men. In the movie it plays out a bit differently, so while Sam was able to cook up the rabbits, and even says that this stew would be fantastic if they could get some taters, to which Golem wonders what taters are, and it's like potatoes. I love it when you can actually read line for line there. But after the meal, Sam as well as Frodo gaze on to see this great army passing through of evil men, as well as a very odd creature known as the Oliphant, which is basically an elephant. But for both, Sam is amazed that he could see such a creature, as both were ever described in legend, and nobody would obviously ever believe them if they told them they saw an Oliphant. From there, in the movie, that is where they are captured by these strange men. They are spies sent from Rohan. In fact, the head of the guard is Boromir's brother, Faramir. Now this is one of the biggest differences that I just can't get behind. After a lot of back and forth, Faramir discovers the ring. In the book, Faramir knows that the ring can only bring destruction. It would not help anybody in this circumstance, and decides to let them go. In the movie, he decides to take the ring back to Gondor. To which the ring is slowly starting to corrupt Frodo a little more with each passing step. Now, I mean, there is a mention of this in the book, but it's more the idea that the ring gets heavier and heavier as they get closer to the Eye of Sauron. And then one of the other changes I'm not a big fan of is the introduction of the Nazgul. Now, in the book, they're basically described as a black horse with bat wings, similar to this cover. Which, is it just me, or does it seem like this can be a heavy metal album? I mean, compare this to, say, Holy Diver. But I'm getting off track. In the movie, it's more like a small dragon, to which it's slowly calling to Frodo, to which he just can't control himself, and almost nearly reveals himself when Sam is able to push him away. In the book, when this scene happens, Frodo remembers this light that Lady Galadriel gave him. He is able to clutch that, and that is able to get rid of the temptation of the ring. The movie ends with Boromir letting them go, with the idea that Gollum is going to lead them to this mysterious she that he keeps referring to as, and that he plans to get the ring for himself after she takes care of them. In the book, though, it goes a lot further than that. After Boromir lets them go, once again with Gollum as the guide ahead, they keep going on until they come to this dank cave, to which the darkness is just impenetrable. Never have they experienced darkness like this since the Mines of Moria. In fact, they even claim it to be darker. They keep going and going, to which it sounds like something is following them, when they notice sinister-looking eyes, rather a cluster of eyes, staring intently at them, to which Frodo remembers the light of Galadriel and is able to stun this odd beast for long enough for them to get to the exit. However, the exit is bound together with a spider web. However, the cords are about as thick as rope. Sam tries feverishly to chop at this, but with no avail. However, Frodo tries again with his sting, to which this is more better built for spiders and is able to take care of the spider web all right. On the outside, though, the horrid creature reveals itself. A gigantic spider known as Shelab, to which Gollum had been mysteriously going to her every so often, adoring her as well as giving her some fresh meat. There is a lot of back and forth, to which Sam is able to stab Shelab pretty well. However, if Shelab lives or dies, unfortunately is never really said in the book. But the main thing to keep in mind is that the spider was able to bite Frodo on the neck, to which he is dead. Sam has to make a very important decision here. What is he going to do with Frodo? He wants to remain by his side, but the destruction of the ring has to come first. So with a heavy heart, he reaches Frodo's necklace and puts on the ring. And what I find even more interesting is once he puts on the ring, there is actually another troop of Nazgul going around, to which he has to put on the ring to remain invisible. Much like how it's described with Frodo, the ring almost kind of sends him to another dimension. But in this dimension, Sam is able to actually understand what some of these orcs as well as other creatures are saying. They find Frodo's body, and they state that he is actually not dead because Shelab prefers to eat her victims alive. This is more just a poison to knock them out. Sam is at one point happy to hear this, but obviously very distraught that he left his master at the mercy of the orcs. He tries his best to make up for this when he follows them to the orc stronghold, to which the doors shut on him, to which he stares up and wonders how he can ever fix it. So, once again, it's a cliche, but I like the book better. While I do find it nuts that Peter Jackson was able to condense the story into about 3 hours, I kind of like the more slower moments. The idea that they really take their time with the characters. You even start to buy into the friendship a little bit. Stuff like that. On the Jackson version, it just kind of has to keep going because, well, I don't think anybody wants to watch a 10-hour movie. But all the same, you can definitely tell that these books, as well as the movies, follow this 3-act structure people talk about. So in the first act, you have to introduce all the characters and then send them on an adventure. The second starts off with the adventure and then ends with the darkest predicament that can be thought of possible. And then in the third installment, they end up winning. The third installment's always been my favorite. And so, I hope you will join me when I cover that epic conclusion, The Return of the King. Till next time, keep having fun.